Ghost Cult Magazine is pleased to welcome in an artist I've been interested in chatting with a very long time, the singular named Plini, just like Prince or Madonna. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am fantastic. Congratulations ahead of time. It's record release week for you. I'm sure you're very busy, a lot of interviews, all kinds of activities to promote the record. That's Impulse Voices coming out this week. Super excited for this record. I've had some time to spend with it, and it's definitely one of my favorites on your whole career. We've Ghost Cult has covered you for a long time. We started out covering a lot of progressive music as a rule, where we started our origins as a zine in Europe to cover avant-garde and progressive artists, and we still have that thread. I'm glad to say, despite covering a lot of other things now. So we still have an audience that cares about this music, which I'm really, I'm thrilled. I definitely wanted to kind of jump right in on the album and sort of get a flavor for you. It seems like obviously the following the arc of your career that it feels like you're very prolific. I don't know if that's the case, but it seems like you're very consistent when it comes to writing, recording. Obviously, the world is upside down with the music business this year, so I don't know if that affected the cycle at all for this. But it seems like you always seem to be working on something new and exciting.
Yeah, I always am. When I look back at it, I think maybe I'm a little bit slower or less prolific than it seems, because it's been 4 years since I did a full-length album, and even then, they're like two of the shortest albums in the history of albums. And I've done a lot of EPs, but at the same time, it's like 12, 13 minutes of music in a year, which really isn't much in retrospect. But I am always working on it. And if anything, making this album was probably a bad sign for the future because I got to spend so long on it. Now I'm going to get used to that, and next album might take me twice as long.
Maybe we're going to get an epic concept record next. Who knows? But yeah, I hear, sometimes I feel like some artists, maybe that's a problem, like a curse and a blessing in this genre or in guitar album orientated music, which is, maybe um, sort of the built-in expectations of fans. Like you talked about song length, but what if you're really great at expressing yourself in a short song and you say everything you need to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally valid. I think there's an issue when you spend forever making music because you're hung up on stuff that doesn't matter, like trying to make it the greatest song of all time or something like that. But I think I have found that there is something really enjoyable about taking just a little longer than you thought you might need to really just focus on different details and try different things. Because I'm really happy with how everything's turned out. It's definitely not perfect. It's probably not the best music I'll ever write in my life, or at least I hope it isn't. Um, but I know it's like the best that I could have done at this point, and I think that's kind of like a happy middle ground.
Nice. That's actually counter the advice that probably everyone gives, which is to say, go out there and tell them your this new album is the best thing I ever did, and I love every single second of it. I'll never top it, because you hear that over and over. I've been a music journalist a long time, and I played in bands for a long time, and so, and I was a music student for many years in music school, and it was always like your next thing has to be the most and best and greatest. And sometimes it's just like this is me right now. I may be different tomorrow, and I think that's very refreshing.
I will say it is the best thing I've ever done, in my opinion. But hopefully, it won't be next time I do something.
Nice. And obviously, I imagine you play every day. Do you play every day just casually to stay, keep your chops up? Do you need to? Do you take time off? How do you really approach like your weekly, week in and week out guitar when you're not busy getting ready to show off your work and maybe do a playthrough video or a live stream or something like that?
Yeah, I actually haven't played guitar much at all in the last few weeks, which is building a lot of excitement for me to when I actually sit down and play it. Because I've never been much of a practicing sort of person. I'll run through songs before a tour a lot because I want to be like as good and comfortable as possible. But I don't really practice when there isn't a goal, and I haven't had the time to sit down and make music uh, yet because of doing stuff like this. So when I have the free time and I can sit down and enjoy it, I'm really excited for what happens.
Nice. I certainly don't want to have guilt feelings keeping you from your art, but I love that approach. And again, just it seems like you've always done things your own way, and maybe even against the grain a little bit of everybody else or what's expected from this, from this your field and your peers. You seem to do things kind of the Plini way. So I really like that, and that's my interpretation of as an outsider. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but and I'd be fine if I was. But it just seems like you kind of everything from your approach, your guitars, how you record, how you write, just seems to be very singular. And I think that's what probably endears you to a lot of fans.
Yeah, I mean, I found stuff that works and stuff that maybe I disagree with. Doesn't mean that it doesn't work in terms of the music industry or like what standard practices are. When I first started making music, I think the general goal for most people is to find a manager and find a record label because that's what can elevate your career. And my goal was to find out what does a manager do and what does a record label do, and like how can I fake doing it myself and just learn about all the different sort of roles there are in the music industry and see what it's like to try and do them myself, um, and just see what happens. It's all kind of like a big experiment. The making the music and releasing it is something that's just fun to sort of figure out as I go.
Right on. I love the DIY approach when, to me, most bands fall under the DIY category, and there's a handful that are really at a different echelon. And I wonder sometimes if the business of the music industry kind of interferes with the artistry. And I wanted to ask you if you've encountered any of that, or because of your approach has been this very DIY kind of centric thing, maybe it's freed you from having to suffer that fate.
There are some things which maybe I would be doing better if I had a like sort of traditional team around me to make me do it that way. I have a terrible habit of giving false estimates for when I'll be finished with music, which is very annoying to anyone who's trying to make CDs or vinyl or tab books or do press. I mean, even for this album, um, it wasn't mastered until after it was announced. So, like, I've got these publicists trying to set up interviews for me, but I guess when they're coming to you, they're like, "Yeah, I mean, the album's almost done, and like, I'll send it to you soon. But can we schedule an interview?" So it definitely doesn't make life the easiest for some aspects of it. But at the same time, I think just being free to make music on my own schedule and in the style that I want, and then see what can come from that keeps it like almost purely fun.
Nice, and that's really important because you don't if it starts to become a chore, you're not gonna wanna do it anymore, right? You're gonna lose the love. So I love that it's still fun for you. By the way, your publicist is a charm and a treat, and they didn't complain at all. And I think they approached me in the definite approach. Shout out Hold Tight PR. They approached me in the perfectly right amount of time to get together with you. So I'm thankful as a journo, and always love them. And they have a lot of your fellow brethren and sisters in
Yeah.
the field. They seem to cover these types of artists very well. So this is good to be in good company and good to sort of have pick the right partners when you do have a partner.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I've found is that everyone that I work with is like a genuine friend as well as someone that is doing a job. Like James from Hold Tight plays in Tesseract, who I've toured with pretty much all over the world, and I've known him for years. And I know like he can send me an angry email of 3 words like "Where the fuck's the album?" But I also know like I know the James that I hang out and have a beer with, so it's all fun the whole way. And I think that's something that I found is really important. It's just doing fun stuff with friends.
Amazing, amazing. And then to talk a little bit, delve into the album for a little bit. Every one of your albums and releases has been a little different. They're all, obviously you can always see the growth. I love a lot, as much as people probably fawn over your playing. I like to look at the whole track. I like to look at the whole song. I like to look at the whole album. That's my personal approach. as much as I love the individual skills and stuff that people very excited about. But I love the tracks themselves. Obviously, the lead track, I'll Tell You Someday, Perfume, the title track, Pan. These are really great songs. They would work if they had vocals on them. They would work at a different genre, perhaps, from a structure standpoint. So it seems like you have always written for the song, even though your name is synonymous with this like instrumental greatness.
Yeah. When I first started writing music, one of my biggest inspirations to do it at all was Dream Theater, and that's a band with a singer. And then the more of like something that really drew me to Steve Vai was how interesting the compositions were, as well as how insane the guitar playing was. And then more and more, especially in the last few years, I've listened to almost exclusively music that has vocals and are songs, and tried to figure out like what elements of that I can bring into doing something where I guess the guitar is sort of the lead instrument, but it doesn't have to be the whole time. And yeah, just trying to figure out how to make an interesting song. And if there's room to play guitar in a flashy way, then I'll do it because I'm the guitarist. But if there isn't room, then I won't try to force it in there.
Well done. And a little further up on that, speaking of some of these tracks, I love some of the other instruments that are not guitar on the album also, because I think they help bring out when you the guitar parts. So I love a lot of keyboards, or maybe it's sequencers, maybe it's parts that are played or written, but there's a lot of cool ear candy in there that's not guitar parts that I find enjoyable, because if it's just a monolith of wave of an army of guitar tracks is cool on paper and sometimes doesn't get executed the way you imagine it. So I love hearing all these other things. Everything seems to have the same amount of detail as the guitar, of course.
Yeah, I have a lot of fun trying to do that stuff, messing around with different keyboard sounds. And I think it kind of makes the guitar more have a greater impact when it does come in. If there's a bed of stuff that isn't guitar, so that when you play that first like distorted electric guitar lead note, it's more meaningful than when it's coming in trying to fight its way through like 8 different rhythm guitars.
Nice.
Well, that's
Right.
there's not too much of a deeper message. It's the album art is always nothing to do with what we think it's going to be when it starts. So I've been working with Alex, who's also Australian, since the first cover, like the first album EP cover. And I can never remember how it happened. I know that this album, I said, let's do something simple, maybe monochrome, quite abstract. And I think we started doing it in March or something. And the result is an explosion of color that is definitely not simple or minimal. Because along the way, he'll do things like add a cloud or add a fish or something. And then I'll say, oh, what if you put a lighthouse on the back of the fish? And it's a very similar process to the music. It starts out with a sort of simple idea, but then has a series of what if we add this, or what if we add this, or what if this is on top of this, until it just becomes accidentally very convoluted.
Nice. Well, convoluted can be good also. And again, just like the music, everything seems to have its place, which is perfect in its own way. Um, I also wanted to ask you. I know part of the timeline for this album was a contest to give away these iconic Strandberg guitar. You have become, related to this instrument now. When people think of the instruments, probably like how Steve Vai became, synonymous with the RG, right? The old Ibanez's with the monkey grip handle. There was that period of time where those guitars were everywhere. So I found it very interesting. I know it's sort of a good matchup between the player and the tool, but it is interesting that there's a wave of people out there now like following in your footsteps, playing the guitar because that's the guitar you ended up with.
Yeah, it is really cool. I think definitely a lot of that has to do with just how good and different and unique the guitars are. There wasn't really, I mean, they've always been headless guitars, but there wasn't really a go-to headless guitar until Strandberg came out. Um, and if you play guitar and you pick one up, most people I find just realize how much it makes sense the way that it's designed. It's kind of just like, oh yeah, this is how a guitar can feel, and that makes them want to play it as well. And that's what it was like for me, to the point where I'm not particularly interested in any other guitars. So I think that combination's made it my sort of part of my identity, is because why would I play anything else?
Right on. Once you find that right thing, keep going back to the well. Don't break it if it's not broken. I just have a few more questions for you, man. You've been terrific. Of course, I know this is a crazy time in the world to put an album out where you can't go on tour and hand it to someone. And I think our very first awareness of you was on tour, either I think with Tesseract or Between the Buried and Me back in the day. But I know you've done some live streaming in the past, and obviously playthrough videos are a thing for you. But do you have any plans for any live streams coming up that you can share? Maybe you can't share it yet, but in the works.
Um, I think I'm so boring on stage because I just stand there and play guitar, that to do a live stream would just be even worse. So I haven't really thought of trying to do something like that. But I've noticed more and more bands are doing really well produced, sort of like a concert DVD with no audience. Like Architects just put out one that looks insane, and Behemoth did one that's basically like a feature film in terms of the production. And I don't think I have the budget for anything like that particularly, but I'd love to do some sort of studio band stuff. But I have an idea, and it usually takes me 2 years to make it happen. So hopefully, the world's back in full health by the time I even get to do it. But we'll see.
Certainly, I do hope we get it all back. I fret constantly for musicians and assorted crew and venue people and touring folks. You are excellent in social media, and so I think at the very least, if you did some kind of streaming, people would be very pumped up about it to follow, and maybe some kind of crossover between a chat and a playthrough or the album or something like that. I think would do very well for you. But again, logistically, not the technology is not quite there for everybody yet across the world, especially, could be a little challenging. So we'll be paying attention in case it works out. We'll be looking out for that if you can do that. And just sort of for a closing thing, this is a little off the beaten path, but we just lost Eddie Van Halen, and I don't know if you were a massive fan or not. You may not be because maybe not the generation. Although you, of course, Vi is also from that same generation or the next one down from Eddie. But I think about our heroes leaving us, right? And I wonder about the future. And, as a person who a lot of people look up to as a guitarist, I do feel the loss of Eddie. Was really a guy from my generation. So I've been very sad about that. But I just wondering if you drew any inspiration from Eddie or any other guitar players, either with us or no longer with us, that you wanted to shout out.
Yeah, I mean, I bought a lot of Van Halen CDs when I first got into guitar, because that was just like the most obvious thing to do. If you look at who is sick at electric guitar, the answer is Eddie Van Halen. Um, and then I got into Steve Vai and Satriani and all those guys. But then I've come back around to Van Halen in the last couple of years. A little bit thanks to Simon, my bass player, because he's a huge like classic rock dude, and just really appreciated the guitar tones and the playing, and his whole attitude on stage is like one of the most inspirational sort of guitar personalities that I've ever seen. Um, and there is, I mean, Alan Holdsworth as well. I hoped that I would get to see Alan Holdsworth live at some point, which unfortunately I won't. But because I have no idea what he was doing at any point, it was just like total alien music in the best way.
Nice. Yeah, he was on another planet by himself, which was insane. I was fortunate enough to see him once with Jean-Luc Ponty in a show, the two of them together, which is
Hmm.
by itself just I walked out of there. I don't know what planet I was on, but because they weren't from here. But yeah, man, thanks for sharing that. Of course, just for the people who keep trying to push this medium forward, I appreciate you as one of those leading people, and just great to see the sort of the growth and the maturation process of your work over many years. So congrats on everything. Congrats on this new record, and yeah, we'll be looking out for you. I hope you can get this world reopened at some point and get you back on tour and doing what you do in front of people. Even if you find you're boring, we still want to see you.
Thanks, man.